Imagine knowing the exact moment you would die. Would you accept it calmly, or would you wonder if something darker was behind it? For one of history's greatest spiritual leaders, this wasn't just a question, it was his reality. In 483 BC, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, began his final journey. At 80 years old, his body was frail, but his mind stayed sharp. He knew his time was near. But was it simply due to old age, or was something more sinister responsible for his death? This is the untold story of Buddha's final days, a journey filled with wisdom, mystery, and perhaps even betrayal. Was it truly the end, or could it have been the beginning? Buddha's final journey. Buddha's last journey started in the city of Rajagaha. At 80 years old, his body was weak, but his mind remained as clear as ever. Despite his failing health, he insisted on traveling north to Kushinagar, a journey of over 200 miles. As Buddha and his devoted disciple Ananda began their trek, rumors spread among his followers. Why undertake such a challenging journey now? Some believed he knew this would be his final trip. Others saw it as his way of teaching the value of detachment and accepting life's impermanence. Along the way, Buddha stopped at villages and towns, sharing wisdom and comforting those he met. He spoke about change, compassion, and the path to true freedom. Even as he moved closer to his end, his focus remained on helping others. The journey wasn't easy. Buddha's health worsened every day, yet he continued forward, embodying the resilience and mindfulness he had taught for decades. His final pilgrimage became a living example of how to face life's greatest challenge, death, with grace and courage. Did Buddha know he was going to die? As Buddha's journey unfolded, his disciples began to wonder, did he know the end was near? Evidence suggests that he did. According to the Parinirvana Sutta, a key Buddhist text about his final days, Buddha told Ananda, "In 3 months, the Tathagata, the Buddha, will enter final nirvana." This declaration came after he refused the option to extend his life, instead letting go of his will to live. But Buddha's awareness went beyond this prediction. He carefully planned his final days, choosing specific places and people for his last teachings. He resolved old disputes, gave final guidance to his disciples, and even arranged the details of his funeral. This knowledge didn't bring fear or sadness. Instead, Buddha used his approaching death as a profound teaching moment. He showed how to face mortality with calmness and wisdom, transforming his death into a lesson for the ages. Buddha's awareness of his approaching death turned into one of his most profound lessons, a reminder that nothing lasts forever. But his ability to predict his own passing raises interesting questions. Was it a sign of extraordinary insight, or simply the calm acceptance of someone who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment? Either way, his approach to death became one of his most enduring teachings. The meal that changed history. Was Buddha poisoned? As Buddha's journey neared its end, he and his disciples arrived at the small village of Pava. There, a devoted metalworker named Kunda invited Buddha to his home for a meal. Little did Kunda know that this simple act of kindness would become one of the most famous meals in religious history. Kunda prepared a special dish for Buddha called Sukara Madhava. The exact nature of this dish remains a mystery to this day. Some believe it was tender pork, while others suggest it might have been a type of mushroom. Whatever it was, Buddha accepted the offering with gratitude. After the meal, however, Buddha became very ill. He experienced severe pain and dysentery. But even in his suffering, Buddha's thoughts turned to Kunda. He instructed his disciple Ananda to comfort the host, reassuring him that offering the Buddha's last meal was a great act of merit and nothing to feel guilty about. Despite his worsening condition, Buddha insisted on continuing his journey to Kushinagar. Though he had to stop often to rest, he pressed on, showing remarkable resilience. His determination became another powerful lesson for his followers, a reminder to face life's hardships with grace and strength. Poison or fate? The mystery of Buddha's last meal. The nature of Buddha's final meal has sparked centuries of debate. Was it just food that disagreed with him, or was there something more sinister behind it? While some ancient texts suggest the dish might have been poisoned, most scholars today believe his illness was due to his age and the exhausting conditions of his journey. The poisoning theory, however, has persisted over time. Some speculate it might have been an accident, while others think it could have been deliberate. Possible motives range from jealousy to a misguided attempt to serve Buddha in a spiritual way. Yet many historians dismiss the idea of poisoning altogether. They argue that it might have been added to the story later, either to draw comparisons with other religious figures or to emphasize Buddha's extraordinary endurance. Buddha himself gave no indication of foul play. In his final moments, he praised Kunda's offering, calling it as significant as the meal he ate before his enlightenment. To Buddha, his last meal wasn't the cause of his death, but rather a meaningful spiritual event. The debate about Buddha's final meal reminds us how history, legend, and spiritual teachings often intertwine in religious narratives. Whether it was poisoned or not, this meal stands as a symbol of Buddha's teachings, accepting life as it comes, understanding the impermanence of all things, and realizing the illusory nature of the physical world. When Buddha arrived in Kushinagar, a small town nestled at the base of the Himalayas, it didn't seem like a significant place. Yet, this quiet town would soon become one of the most sacred sites in Buddhism. As they entered the town, Buddha asked Ananda to prepare a resting place between two sal trees. This choice was symbolic. Buddha had been born under a sal tree, and now he chose to pass away between them, completing the circle of his earthly life. Even though his body was failing, Buddha's mind was sharp. In this moment, he gave one final lesson on impermanence. He told Ananda, "All things that are created will decay. Strive on with diligence." Even in choosing his resting place, Buddha turned the moment into a teaching. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Buddha lay down on his right side with his head facing north. The sal trees, as if sensing the importance of the occasion, burst into bloom, showering unseasonal pale petals on the sage. The once quiet Kushinagar was now witnessing an event that would echo for thousands of years. This was the setting for Buddha's final words, his last breaths, and his entry into Parinirvana, the ultimate release from the cycle of rebirth. Buddha's final message. As Buddha lay between the sal trees, he used his last moments to share his most important teachings. His body was weak, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and his words carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. Ananda, Buddha's loyal disciple, knelt nearby. For decades, Ananda had walked beside Buddha, spreading his teachings and learning from him. But now, as the end approached, Ananda's heart was heavy with sorrow. How could he bear to lose his teacher, his guide, and his closest friend? Though he tried to stay composed, his eyes glistened with unshed tears. Buddha, always aware of the emotions of those around him, turned to Ananda. His voice, though soft, was steady. "You have done much good, Ananda," he said. "You have been by my side through everything. Do not let sorrow cloud your mind. The time for your own awakening is near." These simple yet profound words deeply touched Ananda. Even in his final moments, Buddha continued to teach. His lesson for Ananda and all his followers was not about holding on, but about letting go, even of the closest bonds, because all things are impermanent. Buddha then addressed the Sangha, his community of monks. He said, "If you have any doubts or questions about the Buddha, the Dharma, or the Sangha, ask now. Do not regret later that you missed this chance." His invitation was met with silence, a sign that his teachings had been clear and left no room for uncertainty. Finally, Buddha shared what became known as the Four Great References, guidelines to ensure that his teachings would remain pure and unaltered, even after his passing. Buddha wanted to ensure that his teachings of compassion and mindfulness would continue without being distorted. He emphasized that after his passing, the monks should always compare any supposed teachings of his with the suttas, his recorded discourses, and the Vinaya, the monastic code. This, he explained, would protect his message from being misinterpreted and ensure the Dharma remained pure for future generations. In a touching moment, Buddha comforted his grieving attendant, Ananda. He praised Ananda for his many years of loyal service and urged him to work toward his own enlightenment. "You have done so much good, Ananda," he said. "Make an effort, and soon you will be free from all impurities." Perhaps the most significant part of Buddha's final teaching was his reminder of impermanence. He told his followers once more that all things created must eventually pass away. He urged them to seek liberation through dedicated practice. These last words encapsulated the heart of his life's message. Nothing lasts forever. Non-attachment brings peace, and diligent effort leads to enlightenment. The enlightened one's last breath. As night fell over Kushinagar, Buddha entered his final hours. Although his physical body was deteriorating, his mind stayed sharp and present, as clear as the starry sky above. Yet for Ananda, who stood vigil at his side, the weight of losing his beloved teacher was overwhelming. For years, Ananda had been Buddha's closest companion and most devoted disciple. But now, as the end drew near, he struggled to accept the reality of his teacher's impending death. Tears filled his eyes. Despite practicing the teachings of non-attachment for years, this moment was different. How could he let go of the man who had shown him the path to freedom? Sensing the deep pain in Ananda's heart, Buddha spoke gently. His voice, filled with the same wisdom and compassion that had guided countless people, reached out to console him. "Ananda, do not mourn me," he said. "Everything that arises must pass away. Even this body is subject to decay. What I have taught you is the truth," Buddha said. "Do not cling even to this." Though Ananda was still deeply saddened, these words brought him a sense of peace. His teacher's final message was a balm for his grief, reminding him that even the most cherished connections must one day be let go. In that moment, Ananda understood that the greatest act of love was to release what we hold dear. During these precious final moments, Buddha continued to show extraordinary compassion. When he heard that a wandering ascetic named Siddhartha wished to speak with him, Buddha gently overruled Ananda's concern about disturbing him. "Let him come," Buddha said. "He seeks enlightenment." Even in his final hours, Buddha remained devoted to guiding others toward liberation. Siddhartha's encounter with the dying Buddha became a life-changing moment. After a brief teaching, Siddhartha achieved enlightenment and became Buddha's final direct disciple just hours before his passing. This last conversion highlighted Buddha's unwavering dedication to teaching until his very last breath. As midnight drew near, Buddha addressed his gathered disciples one final time. He urged them to continue their spiritual practice with diligence and reminded them that all things that are created must eventually dissolve. Even in his final moments, he embodied the calmness and acceptance he had taught throughout his life. The air was heavy with emotion as Buddha's breathing became shallower. His disciples, knowing these were their final moments with their teacher, struggled to accept the reality of impermanence, something Buddha had always emphasized. The hour of Buddha's passing had come, signaling the end of an era and the beginning of a timeless legacy. When Buddha left this world, the moment that changed everything, as the night deepened, Buddha entered his final meditation. His disciples sat in silence, watching with reverence as their teacher gave one last demonstration of a fully awakened mind. Buddha moved through the jhanas, the deep meditative states he had mastered long ago. His breathing slowed, his body became still, yet a soft glow seemed to radiate from him. Even in his final moments, Buddha was teaching, showing how to meet death with complete awareness and serenity. Suddenly, the earth trembled, and a soft light filled the salgrove. Buddha opened his eyes one last time, looking at his disciples with infinite compassion. Then, with a steady voice, he shared his final words. "All compounded things must decay. Strive diligently for your liberation." With a final exhalation, Buddha entered Parinirvana, a state beyond birth and death. His passing marked not just the end of his earthly life, but the beginning of an enduring legacy that would guide millions toward enlightenment. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The gathered monks, despite years of learning about impermanence, were stunned by the reality of this moment. The passing of their teacher felt overwhelming. Anuruddha, one of Buddha's closest disciples, broke the silence. With calm reverence, he said, "When the Master entered final nirvana, he left behind the aggregates of this world." Then he recited a verse. "All must lay aside the aggregates in this world. A master like this, a supreme person, a conqueror with the power of will, the Tathagata has attained nirvana." As dawn broke and the first light touched the sal grove, the news of Buddha's passing began to spread. The Enlightened One had entered final nirvana. An era had come to an end, but the ripples of this moment would shape history and inspire generations for centuries to come. Buddha's last words, the ultimate teaching on life and death. In the stillness of that fateful night, Buddha's final words echoed through the sal grove, leaving a lasting impression on his disciples and the entire Buddhist tradition. Buddha's last words, spoken in Pali, carry a profound and timeless message. Translated into English, they are, "Now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence." These were not just the final words of a dying teacher. They captured the essence of Buddha's entire philosophy, a powerful reminder of the truths he had dedicated his life to sharing. The first part, "All conditioned things are subject to decay," highlights one of the central teachings of Buddhism, impermanence. Buddha used his own death as a teaching moment to show that even an enlightened being is bound by the natural law of dissolution. The second part, "Strive on with diligence," is a call to action. Buddha urged his followers not to despair at his passing, but to renew their commitment to the path of enlightenment. His final instruction reminded them that each person must take responsibility for their own spiritual journey and work toward liberation with effort and perseverance. These last words embody the heart of Buddha's teachings, a clear understanding of reality combined with an empowering call to spiritual effort. Even today, they inspire millions of Buddhists around the world, guiding them as they navigate the path to enlightenment. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the sal grove, the reality of Buddha's passing began to settle in. Among his disciples, the reactions were as diverse as human emotions themselves. Some of the younger, less experienced monks openly wept. Their cries pierced the morning air as they lamented, "Too soon has the Blessed One passed away." They were overwhelmed by grief, unable to fully accept the loss. Others sat in silence, stunned and grappling with the enormity of the moment. In contrast, the elder monks, who had deeply internalized Buddha's teachings, remained composed. Anuruddha, displaying remarkable calm, reminded the group, "Enough, friends. Do not grieve. Do not mourn. Hasn't the Blessed One already taught us that all things that bring joy and delight are subject to change, separation, and eventual dissolution?" Ananda, Buddha's devoted attendant, found himself torn between these two responses. While deeply saddened, he took on the responsibility of informing the neighboring Malla clan, whose territory included Kushinagar. The news spread quickly, and preparations for the funeral rites began. The Mallas arrived with offerings of flowers, incense, and musical instruments. They honored Buddha with celestial songs, dances, and gifts. For 7 days, they paid homage to his body, creating a festival-like atmosphere. Rather than mourning his death, they celebrated his life and teachings. This immediate response to Buddha's passing became a living example of his lessons. It showed the different stages of understanding impermanence and non-attachment. While some struggled with sorrow, others embraced the reality of change, demonstrating how deeply Buddha's teachings had taken root. How Buddhist practice transforms loss and grief. Buddha's passing was not just an end, it was a beginning. His entry into Parinirvana set into motion a legacy that would influence the spiritual world for thousands of years. In the days after his death, Buddha's closest disciples gathered to preserve his teachings. This meeting, known as the First Buddhist Council, ensured that Buddha's wisdom would endure long after his physical form was gone. During this council, his teachings and the monastic code were collected and codified, creating the foundation for Buddhism's spread across Asia and eventually the entire world. Buddha's final days were themselves a powerful teaching. His awareness of his own death, his final journey, and his peaceful passing all served to reinforce his core lessons on impermanence and living mindfully. These events, just like his words, continue to inspire Buddhists today. The way Buddha faced death also deeply shaped Buddhist philosophy. It showed that even an enlightened being is subject to the laws of nature. This reinforced the central Buddhist belief that everything is impermanent and that change is a fundamental part of reality. Perhaps the most profound outcome of Buddha's death was his transformation from a living teacher into a universal symbol of enlightenment. Temples, statues, and stupas containing his relics were built around the world. These sites became places of devotion and constant reminders of his teachings. Today, more than 2,500 years after his passing, Buddha's influence is stronger than ever. His teachings on mindfulness, compassion, and the nature of the mind have reached new audiences, especially in the West. They now influence fields like psychology, neuroscience, and even popular culture. In both his life and death, Buddha left behind a profound truth. True immortality lies not in preserving the body, but in the lasting impact of shared wisdom and transformed lives. Lessons from Buddha's final days. As we reflect on Buddha's last days, we're reminded of how one life and one death can echo through history. Buddha's passing wasn't just the end of his journey, it was his final, most powerful lesson. It was a demonstration of his teachings on impermanence, mindfulness, and the path to liberation. From his awareness of his death to his final words, Buddha showed us how to face life's greatest challenge, death, with grace and wisdom. His journey reminds us that every moment, even our last, holds the potential for awakening. But the story of Buddha's death isn't just a historical account or a religious narrative. It offers a universal truth. Our time here is limited. Yet within this truth lies freedom. If you knew today was your last day, what would you change? How can we, like Buddha, live with purpose, fully aware of how precious every moment is? I challenge you to take Buddha's final words to heart. All things are subject to change. Let this knowledge inspire you to act. What will you do today, this week, or this year to live more fully and mindfully? Share your thoughts in the comments below. How has this exploration of Buddha's final days impacted you? What lessons will you carry forward? If you found value in this reflection, please like and subscribe to Buddha's Wisdom. We have many more videos diving into Buddha's teachings and how they relate to modern life. As Buddha taught us, every ending is also a beginning. So let's start again, practicing with diligence and awareness. Until next time, may you find peace in the ever-changing nature of life. Namaste.